billionaire saved a homeless mother and child who fainted in the rain. A few days later, he was stunned to see the large scar on the woman's hand, and what the millionaire discovered made him pale. The soft hum of the city was muffled by the heavy rain outside, thick droplets pelting against the glass walls of Vaughan Enterprises. Inside, the office was quiet, save for the rhythmic clicking of keys as Nicholas Vaughan typed, eyes fixed on the glowing screen. His desk was immaculate, papers neatly stacked, a crystal tumbler of untouched whiskey resting beside his laptop. The storm had rolled in hours ago, and by now the streets below were slick with rain, the neon glow of traffic lights reflecting in puddles. The city had slowed, but Nicholas hadn't. A knock on the door broke his focus. "Sir, it's getting late," his assistant Julia said as she stepped inside, her voice laced with cautious concern. "The weather's getting worse. You should head home before the roads flood." Nicholas didn't look up, fingers still gliding over the keyboard. "I'll leave when I'm done." Julia hesitated. She had worked for him long enough to know he wasn't the kind of man who left things unfinished. Work was his anchor, his distraction, his purpose. She shifted her weight. "At least let me call your driver." "I'm driving myself." That made her blink. Nicholas Vaughan rarely drove himself, not because he couldn't, but because he rarely saw the point in it. It was an unnecessary use of time, something best left to others while he worked. Still, there was a finality in his tone that told her there was no room for debate. She sighed. "All right, just be careful." Nicholas didn't acknowledge the sentiment. By the time he stepped out of the building, the city had thinned to a hushed blur of headlights and flickering signs. The rain hadn't let up. If anything, it had worsened, cascading in relentless sheets against the pavement. He slid into the driver's seat of his sleek black Aston Martin, the leather cool against his palm as he gripped the wheel. The car hummed to life, smooth and silent, and he pulled out onto the deserted streets. The rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers was the only sound as he drove, his thoughts drifting back to the endless cycle of meetings, negotiations, and acquisitions. Numbers, strategies, markets. His life distilled into cold, calculated decisions. Outside, the storm raged. Lightning split the sky, a jagged crack of white illuminating the road ahead. It was then that he saw her, a lone figure huddled at the edge of the sidewalk, clutching something, someone, to her chest. The weak glow of a flickering street lamp cast a pale halo around her, highlighting the thin, soaked fabric clinging to her body, the way her shoulders curled inward as if bracing against an invisible force. Nicholas's grip on the wheel tightened. A woman, a child. His foot hovered over the brake. The rational part of his mind, the part honed by years of dealing with opportunists and manipulators, warned him against it. People on the street always had stories, some true, some not. It wasn't his problem. The light ahead turned green. He pressed the gas. The car rolled forward. For a second, he thought he would keep driving. But then, as his headlights swept past her, she moved. No, she crumbled. Her legs gave out, her frail frame folding onto the wet concrete, her arms tightening around the bundle in her grasp. The baby let out a thin, reedy cry, the sound cutting through the rain like a blade. Nicholas cursed. His foot slammed the brake. The car skidded slightly before coming to a halt a few feet away. The rain pounded against the windshield, loud and unrelenting, but inside the car, there was only silence. A silence filled with hesitation. For a long second, he didn't move. Then, with a muttered, "Damn it," he shoved open the door and stepped into the storm. The cold hit him immediately, rain soaking into the expensive fabric of his suit, but he barely registered it. His shoes splashed through puddles as he strode toward her. She didn't react to his approach. Her body was trembling, her breathing ragged. The bundle in her arms, a child, a baby, was wrapped in a thin, sodden blanket, its small face barely visible. Nicholas crouched beside her. "Can you hear me?" No response. She was conscious, but barely. His gaze flicked over her, gaunt features, hollow cheeks, dark circles beneath her eyes. A woman pushed to the edge. He exhaled sharply. This was not his responsibility. And yet, Nicholas reached forward, hesitating only for a fraction of a second before carefully touching her shoulder. She flinched. The reaction was immediate, primal. Her eyes snapped open, wild and full of fear, as she shrank away from his touch. "Hey!" His voice was sharper than he intended. He adjusted, softening it slightly. "I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't look convinced. His jaw tensed. He wasn't good at this, at reassurance, at soft words, but he wasn't about to leave her here either. He glanced at the baby. Its tiny fingers twitched weakly against the wet fabric. Too weak, too still. Nicholas made a decision. "I have a car." He spoke with calm authority, the same voice he used in boardrooms. "Come with me." She shook her head, eyes darting around as if expecting danger from every direction. "It's not a choice." She still didn't move. Nicholas exhaled, then did something he never thought he would. He slipped off his coat, draping it over her shoulders. The warmth startled her. She stared at him, blinking against the rain, as if trying to understand. Nicholas gestured toward the car. "You can either sit there or stay out here and freeze." A long pause. Then, slowly, reluctantly, she let him help her up. The moment she stood, she swayed dangerously. Nicholas caught her before she collapsed again. Her body was ice-cold, frighteningly light. He wasn't sure if she would make it through the night without proper care. "What the hell am I doing?" He pushed the thought aside and guided her toward the car. Once she was inside, he shut the door and took one last look at the empty street. Then, without another word, he got behind the wheel and drove. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside that car, something had shifted. The car rolled to a smooth stop in front of the towering estate, its dark silhouette barely visible through the misting rain. Nicholas shut off the engine, but for a moment, neither of them moved. The rhythmic sound of rain against the windshield filled the silence between them. Shirley sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped tightly around Roy's small body. He had fallen into a deep sleep somewhere along the drive, his feverish breath warm against her collarbone. She didn't look at Nicholas, and he didn't expect her to. Without a word, he pushed open the door and stepped into the downpour, walking around the car to open hers. She hesitated, just a flicker, before shifting carefully, adjusting Roy's weight as she climbed out. Inside, the house was vast and quiet, the scent of wood and leather lingering in the air. Nicholas left them in the dimly lit living room and disappeared for a few minutes. When he returned, he placed a tray on the coffee table, 2 sandwiches, and a steaming glass of milk. Shirley sat stiffly on the couch, Roy curled against her, his tiny fingers still gripping the fabric of her damp sweater. She didn't reach for the food immediately, just eyed it with cautious hesitation. "You should eat," Nicholas said, his voice low, unreadable. She didn't answer. After a long pause, she picked up the sandwich, taking slow, mechanical bites. Roy stirred, but the fever had left him drowsy, too weak to do much more than nuzzle into her warmth. Nicholas didn't press. He just sat in the chair across from them, watching as Shirley eventually lifted the glass of milk to her lips, drinking silently. Minutes passed. Neither of them spoke. Roy was the first to succumb to sleep, his breath evening out against his mother's chest. Shirley's eyelids drooped soon after, her body sagging into the cushions as exhaustion finally won. Nicholas stood. He moved quietly, pulling a blanket from the armrest and draping it over them both. For a moment, he hesitated, watching the slow rise and fall of their breathing, the way Shirley unconsciously tightened her arms around her son. Then, without a word, he turned and left the room. Morning arrived in silence. Soft light filtered through sheer curtains, casting delicate shadows against the cream-colored walls. The air smelled unfamiliar, clean linen, faint traces of sandalwood, and something impossibly expensive. Shirley stirred. Her body, accustomed to cold pavement and restless sleep, protested the unfamiliar comfort beneath her. The sheets were too smooth, the mattress too forgiving. A dream. Then reality settled in. She remembered the rain, the baby's cries, the weight of exhaustion pressing down until she could barely stand. She remembered the man, tall, cold, unreadable, watching her with something between reluctance and obligation. Her breathing quickened. Her fingers curled around the small, warm body beside her. Roy. She turned sharply, her heart hammering, but he was still there, nestled into the blanket, his tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. His face, usually pinched with hunger and discomfort, was peaceful. He had slept well. Her gaze flickered around the room. It was too much, too large, too polished. The bed alone could have fit an entire shelter's worth of cots. An elegant chandelier hung overhead, muted sunlight catching on crystal edges. The walls bore no personal touches, only meticulously selected art, pieces that suggested money rather than sentiment. She swallowed hard. Too different. Where am I? The events of last night unraveled slowly. The rain, the headlights. The stranger stopped. The warmth of food, the weight of her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Her stomach twisted. She had let herself fall asleep here, in a place she didn't belong, a place owned by a man she didn't know. As if sensing her unease, Roy shifted in his sleep, a soft whimper escaping his lips. She instinctively drew him closer, brushing his forehead, still warm, but better than last night. A creak. The door. Shirley stiffened as it opened. The man from last night stepped inside, moving with quiet precision, like someone accustomed to having space bend around him. Even now, in the morning light, he looked sharp, crisp dress shirt, sleeves rolled up just enough to suggest effortless control. Their eyes met. Shirley's body tensed. Nicholas noticed. He sighed, stepping further inside before finally speaking. "You don't remember much from last night, do you?" Shirley kept her hold firm on Roy, her mind racing to find an answer that wouldn't make her seem weak. "I remember enough." A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face before he nodded. "Nicholas Vaughan." She blinked. The name settled in her chest with an odd weight. She didn't know much about the world of billionaires, but she had heard it before. On the news, in passing conversations. Powerful, wealthy, untouchable. Nicholas's gaze dropped briefly to Roy before returning to her. "And you?" Shirley hesitated. It had been a long time since anyone asked her name and meant it. "Shirley Monroe." Her voice was hoarse, foreign to her own ears. "And this is Roy." Nicholas gave a small, barely perceptible nod. He didn't repeat their names, didn't soften, but something in his expression shifted. Silence stretched between them. Then he exhaled, running a hand through his hair, the gesture almost too human for someone who carried himself like he was untouchable. "You can stay for the night," he said finally. His tone left no room for negotiation, but also no warmth. "Don't get comfortable." Shirley flinched slightly at the last part. She had no intention of getting comfortable. She nodded once, wary. "Thank you." The words felt foreign, stiff on her tongue. Nicholas didn't respond. Instead, his gaze flicked to Roy again, sharper this time. "He was running a fever last night." Shirley swallowed hard. "He's been sick for a few days." Nicholas's jaw tensed. "Why didn't you say anything?" Her shoulders pulled inward. "Because it's not your problem." The words were clipped, defensive. Nicholas studied her for a long moment before speaking. "I'm calling my doctor." Shirley stiffened. It's not a discussion." Her pulse quickened. This man, this stranger, spoke in absolutes, like someone who was used to ordering things and having them happen. Her pride itched, raw and wounded. But Roy stirred against her, his small body too warm, and her resistance wavered. "Fine," she muttered. Nicholas didn't acknowledge her surrender. He only pulled out his phone and made the call. Shirley exhaled shakily, brushing damp curls away from Roy's face. She should have left last night, but something told her leaving now wasn't an option anymore. The air inside the house was still. A different kind of silence. The kind that came with control, wealth, and carefully maintained order. But beneath it, something unfamiliar lingered. Nicholas leaned against the kitchen counter, fingers wrapped loosely around a glass of water. His mind wasn't on the untouched reports waiting in his office, nor on the emails piling up. It was on the sound of a baby's shallow breathing, just down the hall. He shouldn't have called the doctor. That thought had settled in his chest the moment he ended the call. Yet here he was, waiting. The sharp knock at the front door pulled him back. Nicholas straightened, pushing away the unease. He moved with his usual efficiency, opening the door to reveal Dr. Patel, a man in his mid-50s with a composed, no-nonsense demeanor. "Short notice," Patel remarked, stepping inside as he shook off the rain from his coat. "This must be important." Nicholas didn't respond, simply leading him through the hall. It wasn't important. At least, it shouldn't have been. When they reached the bedroom, Nicholas hesitated before knocking lightly. Silence. Then, a faint rustle. The door opened just enough for Shirley's wary eyes to meet his. The exhaustion was etched deeper into her face now, shadows clinging to the hollows of her cheeks. She didn't speak, didn't have to. "The doctor's here," Nicholas said. Shirley's grip on the door remained tight. A pause. Then, with obvious reluctance, she stepped aside, revealing the small bundle in the bed behind her. Dr. Patel wasted no time. He moved to the bedside, setting down his bag before carefully pressing the back of his fingers against Roy's forehead. The baby stirred at the touch but didn't wake. Nicholas watched from where he stood, arms crossed, gaze flickering between the doctor's movements and the way Shirley hovered protectively nearby. She didn't trust any of this. She didn't trust him. That was understandable. And yet as Patel worked, Nicholas found himself lingering. It wasn't necessary. He had already done what he needed, brought the doctor, ensured the kid wasn't going to die on his watch. He should have left, gone back to his office, made calls, something. But instead, he remained rooted in place, watching the way Shirley's fingers smoothed over Roy's tiny arm, her touch feather-light yet fierce, as if sheer will alone could keep him safe. Watching the exhaustion in her posture, the way her body folded slightly, as though she were barely standing under the weight of it all. "Dehydration," Patel finally said, straightening. "His fever is breaking, but he needs fluids. Proper rest." He turned toward Shirley. "I'll leave you something for him." Shirley's lips parted, then pressed into a thin line. She nodded. Patel packed his things, glancing at Nicholas. "I assume you'll handle the cost?" Nicholas's reply was automatic. "Yes." He barely registered Shirley's head snapping toward him, her spine stiffening. Patel nodded, scribbling something on a notepad before handing Shirley the prescription. "If he doesn't improve in the next day or so, call me, but I expect he'll be fine." With that, he left. Silence. Nicholas turned toward the door, intending to leave as well, but something stopped him. Shirley was still standing by the bed, one hand resting on Roy's blanket. Her jaw was tight, her shoulders rigid. She was angry. He sighed. "What?" She didn't look at him. "You shouldn't have done that." His brow furrowed. "Done what?" "This." She gestured vaguely toward the door. "Calling a doctor. Paying for it. Making decisions for me." Nicholas's patience thinned. "Your son was sick." "I know that," she snapped, finally looking at him. Her eyes were dark, a storm of emotions he couldn't quite name. "And I would have figured something out." "Like what?" His voice was sharp now. "Hoping he got better on his own." Shirley's fingers curled into fists at her sides. He exhaled, shaking his head. "Look, I don't expect to thank you. I don't expect anything. But if you're trying to argue that you would have handled it, then—" "I have handled it," she cut in. "For months. Alone." The words sat heavy in the air between them. Nicholas said nothing. She exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her temple. The fight drained from her expression, leaving only exhaustion behind. "I'm not used to people stepping in," she admitted, voice softer now, though not any less strained. He wasn't sure what to do with that, so he simply said, "Yeah, I got that." Shirley let out something almost like a laugh, short, dry, humorless. Then, without another word, she turned back to Roy. Nicholas took the hint. He left. Later that night, Nicholas sat in his office, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. The day should have faded into background noise by now. The meetings, the reports, all the things that usually occupied his mind without effort. And yet, when he closed his eyes, all he could see was the way Shirley's hands trembled when she smoothed Roy's blanket, the weight behind her words when she said she had handled things alone. It unsettled him. He wasn't the kind of man who lingered on things. He solved problems, made decisions, and moved on. Yet, here he was, thinking about a woman and a child who weren't his problem. The ice in his whiskey melted. He didn't drink it. Down the hall, a soft sound carried through the silence. Faint. Barely there. Nicholas stilled. It was a melody, low and uneven. A lullaby. Shirley's voice. She was singing, but there was something in it. A crack. A rawness. Like someone trying to comfort another, even when they couldn't find comfort themselves. Nicholas sat there, staring at the wall, listening without meaning to. He didn't know why. Didn't know why it made his chest feel heavy. Didn't know why he wasn't moving. The song faded. The silence returned. And yet, Nicholas didn't feel like the same man who had walked into that house the night before. The following days settled into a quiet, uneasy rhythm. Shirley remained distant, not hostile, not ungrateful, but always on edge. She moved through the house like a ghost, making herself small, never lingering in one place for too long. Even when she accepted help, she did so with reluctance, as if she expected the kindness to be taken back at any moment. Nicholas noticed. He wasn't the type to pry into people's lives. He had never cared enough to bother. But there was something about the way Shirley carried herself, like someone bracing for impact, that left an unfamiliar itch beneath his skin. He caught glimpses of it in the way she stiffened whenever he entered a room, in the way her eyes darted toward the exits as if measuring the distance to the door. She never spoke about her past, never volunteered details, and Nicholas didn't ask. The house was quiet. Not the sterile, curated silence Nicholas was used to, the kind that came with wealth, control, and the absence of unnecessary noise. This was different, a lived-in silence. As he stepped through the front door, the scent of something warm and unfamiliar greeted him, something rich, savory, something undeniably homemade. Nicholas's brows furrowed. He wasn't expecting company. He moved through the hallway, his footsteps muted against the polished hardwood, and when he entered the kitchen, he stopped. Shirley was there, standing at the stove. She hadn't noticed him yet. Her back was to him, dark hair pulled into a loose knot, stray strands falling against the curve of her neck. She moved carefully, measured, as if the act of preparing a meal wasn't second nature to her, but something she used to do a long time ago. On the counter beside her, Roy was tucked in a blanket inside an empty laundry basket, watching his mother with quiet curiosity. Nicholas leaned against the doorframe. This wasn't what he expected to come home to. "You didn't have to do this." Shirley startled, fingers tightening around the wooden spoon in her grip. She turned her head slightly, just enough to glance at him, then looked away. "I know," she said simply. Nicholas stepped further into the kitchen, his gaze drifting over the neatly stacked plates on the drying rack, the cleaned countertops, the faint scent of citrus from a wiped-down surface. "You cleaned too." Shirley tensed slightly, stirring the pot in front of her. "It's the least I can do." Nicholas exhaled, setting his keys down on the island. "That's not necessary." Shirley shook her head. "You took us in. You didn't have to." Something about the way she said it, the quiet weight in her voice, made Nicholas pause. Like gratitude wasn't something she allowed herself often. She turned off the stove, reaching for 2 bowls from the cabinet. He watched her carefully. "Have you eaten yet?" Shirley hesitated. "I was going to." Nicholas pulled out a chair at the dining table. "Sit. Eat with me." It wasn't an order, but it wasn't a request either. Shirley stilled. Nicholas could see it then, the way her shoulders tensed ever so slightly, the way her grip on the bowl tightened just enough to turn her knuckles pale. She didn't want to sit with him, not because she feared him, but because she wasn't supposed to fit in this world. "I don't think that's a good idea," she murmured. Nicholas tilted his head. "Why?" Shirley exhaled, shaking her head as she ladled soup into a bowl. "Because you and I aren't the same." Nicholas leaned back in his chair, watching her. "I never said we were." Shirley set one of the bowls in front of him and turned to grab the other. He didn't miss the way her sleeve slid up slightly, revealing a jagged, uneven scar that ran along the underside of her forearm. It was old, faded, but unmistakable. She noticed his stare too late. Nicholas spoke before she could pull her sleeve down. "That's an old wound." Shirley froze. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in her eyes, an instinct to shut down, to hide. Then, just as quickly, she yanked her sleeve down and turned her back to him. "Just a small accident," she said, voice flat. Nicholas didn't miss the shift in her posture, the way she went rigid, how her hands trembled ever so slightly as she picked up her own bowl. He didn't press, but something about it unsettled him. For a moment he thought she might leave, that she'd take her food and disappear into whatever corner of the house she'd been staying in. But after a long silence, she turned and sat across from him. A small thing, a hesitant thing, but a choice. They ate in silence, not uncomfortable, but not familiar either. Somewhere in between. That night, Nicholas sat in his office trying to focus, but his mind wouldn't cooperate. Not with the image of that scar flashing through his thoughts. He had seen plenty of scars before. Some were careless injuries, childhood mishaps. Others had stories behind them, stories people didn't tell, but that you could read in their eyes. Shirley's scar was the latter, and it wasn't just the mark on her skin. It was the way she had hidden it, the way she had stiffened when she realized he saw. Something about it bothered him more than it should. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. This wasn't his business. She wasn't his problem. But as he sat there, staring at the untouched whiskey on his desk, he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't ready to leave it alone. The storm rolled in late that evening, unrelenting sheets of rain hammering against the windows, wind howling through the trees outside. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and the quiet tension of something inevitable. Nicholas stood by the window, watching the storm unfold. Lightning illuminated the sky, brief and violent, casting sharp shadows across the room. He had seen plenty of storms before, but this one felt different, like it was waiting for something. A muffled sound broke through the quiet. At first, he thought he had imagined it. But then, there it was again. a soft, distressed noise from the hall. Frowning, Nicholas pushed away from the window and stepped out of his office. The house was dark, save for the faint glow spilling from a half-open door. Shirley's room. His steps were instinctively quiet as he approached. He hadn't meant to intrude, hadn't even realized he was moving until he was already there. But something about the air felt wrong. Then he heard it. A weak, pained whimper. Not from Shirley. From Roy. Nicholas exhaled sharply, pushing the door open. Shirley was sitting on the bed, her body curled protectively around Roy, her hand pressing against his forehead. The dim light cast shadows across her face, but Nicholas could see the panic in her eyes. She looked up at him, and for the first time since she had arrived, she didn't look guarded. She looked afraid. "He's burning up again," she whispered. Nicholas's chest tightened. Patel wouldn't make it through this storm. Without hesitation, he pulled his phone from his pocket. Shirley shook her head. He won't get here in time. Nicholas swore under his breath. She was right. He had seen the roads on his way back earlier. Even for someone like Patel, they would be impossible. His mind worked quickly, scanning through possibilities. Then, a memory surfaced. Patel's voice on the phone last time. The instructions he had given just in case. "I'll handle it," Nicholas said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Shirley looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to gauge whether or not to trust him. Then, finally, she nodded. Nicholas moved quickly, filling a bowl with lukewarm water and grabbing a clean cloth. His hands worked efficiently, as they always did, except this wasn't a business deal. This wasn't something he could control with logic alone. He wasn't used to feeling this helpless. But when he turned back to the bed, his gaze landed on Shirley. On the way, she watched Roy with a desperate kind of love that made his chest ache in a way he didn't understand. She wasn't helpless. She had been doing this alone for so long, holding herself together with nothing but sheer will. Nicholas sat down beside her, pressing the cloth gently against Roy's skin. The child let out a weak sound, shifting slightly, but didn't wake. Shirley exhaled shakily. "I used to love the rain." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Nicholas glanced at her. "What changed?" She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was distant, lost somewhere beyond the storm outside. Then, slowly, she spoke. "There was an accident," she said, her voice hollow. "A long time ago." Nicholas's grip on the cloth tightened slightly, but he forced himself to keep his expression neutral. "I was in the car with my parents. It was late and it was raining. I don't remember everything, just the headlights. The sound of metal." Her breath hitched. "By the time I woke up, they were gone." Nicholas swallowed. The weight in his chest felt heavier now, but he didn't speak. "I had no one after that," she continued. "No family left. Just distant relatives who saw me as a burden." A humorless smile touched her lips. "So when Willie came along, it was easy to believe he was different." Nicholas's jaw clenched. "Willie." She nodded. "It was arranged in a way. He seemed kind at first, said all the right things, and I wanted to believe him." Her voice grew quieter. "But people aren't always who they pretend to be." Nicholas didn't need details to know what she meant. He had seen that kind of betrayal before, the kind that started with promises and ended with scars. The room fell silent, save for the rain. For the first time, Nicholas realized how much she had lost, and for the first time, he realized how much he wanted to know more. Much later, after Roy had cooled down and Shirley had finally drifted into an exhausted sleep, Nicholas sat in his office once again. The storm outside had calmed, but the one inside his mind hadn't. A name, a location, a memory buried beneath years of things he had forced himself to forget. The accident. Something about it gnawed at him, a creeping discomfort that wouldn't settle. Nicholas stared at the untouched whiskey in front of him. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure he wanted to remember. Do you think Ethan is worth keeping a secret from? If so, leave a comment saying, "Fried chicken." The rain had stopped, but the unease remained. Nicholas couldn't sleep. The weight in his chest refused to settle, a gnawing sense of unease clawing at the edges of his mind. Shirley's voice still echoed in his ears, quiet but steady, each word laced with a pain that was too familiar. The accident. It wasn't just the way she had spoken about it. It was the way her fingers had curled into the blanket, the way her eyes had stayed fixed on the storm outside, as if she were trapped somewhere far away. And the worst part, something about her story felt wrong, or rather, it felt right in a way that terrified him. Nicholas had spent years burying his past under layers of control, power, and wealth. He had built a life where the ghosts couldn't reach him. But tonight, they felt closer than ever. With a quiet exhale, he grabbed his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Vaughn." Nicholas leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. "I need information." A pause. Then a knowing hum. "Something personal." Nicholas didn't answer, but the silence itself was an admission. "Send me what you've got," he said instead, "as soon as possible." The line went dead. Nicholas dropped the phone onto his desk, staring at the empty glass beside him. He wasn't sure if he wanted to know, but he had already set things in motion. The report. By the next afternoon, a thick envelope arrived at his office. Nicholas didn't open it immediately. He sat there for a long time, staring at it, fingers drumming lightly against the polished wood of his desk. Then slowly, he exhaled and unfolded the pages. The first words made his blood run cold. 15 years ago, a fatal car accident, 2 victims. The driver lost control after a violent altercation nearby. Nicholas's grip on the paper tightened. The altercation was caused by him. His pulse roared in his ears. 15 years ago, a rainy night, a debt that needed to be collected. Nicholas saw the scene play out in his mind like a fragmented film. Himself, younger, angrier, more reckless, standing on the street in the middle of the night. The man he had been sent to remind had been desperate. There had been shouting, a struggle, fists connecting with flesh. Then, headlights. The screech of tires, a car swerving. He had turned his head just in time to see the crash. The metal is crumpling, the shattered glass, the distant wail of sirens. And then he had walked away. He had made an anonymous call for an ambulance, and then he had left. Because it wasn't his problem. Except now. Now it was. The papers trembled slightly in his grip. He forced himself to scan further down the page. The victims, Robert and Eleanor Monroe. Their daughter, 12 years old, survived. Shirley Monroe. Nicholas's stomach twisted violently. The words blurred. He had to put the paper down, pressing his fingers against his temple, as if that would stop the surge of nausea clawing at him. This wasn't possible. And yet, it was. Shirley didn't know. She had no idea that the man who had pulled her off the street, the man who had taken her and Roy into his home, the man who had sat beside her as she spoke about that night, was the reason her parents had died. He had destroyed her life. Nicholas shoved back from his desk so abruptly that the chair scraped against the floor. He needed air. By the time night fell, the knowledge sat heavy in his chest. He moved through the house like a man walking through water, every step sluggish, mind clouded. He had made himself untouchable, untouchable to guilt, to regret. And yet, here it was, sinking its claws into him. Down the hall, he caught sight of Shirley through the partially open door of the guest room. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands smoothing over Roy's blanket. The soft glow of the lamp cast gentle shadows on her face, highlighting the quiet exhaustion in her features. She looked at peace. She looked like she finally felt safe. And she had no idea. Nicholas turned away before she could notice him. He had spent years being the kind of man who never looked back. But tonight, he couldn't stop. He couldn't stop seeing that night, the headlights, the crash. Her parents' names are on the report, the way she had spoken about them, not knowing the truth. He gripped the railing of the staircase, exhaling sharply. Telling her would destroy her, not telling her would destroy him. For the first time in his life, Nicholas Vaughan had no idea what to do. The morning air was thick, heavy with the remnants of last night's storm. A grey sky loomed overhead, and the scent of damp earth clung to the wind. The world outside Nicholas's estate was washed clean, yet inside, nothing had changed. The weight in his chest hadn't lifted. It had only grown heavier. He stood on the terrace, coffee in hand, watching the rainwater drip from the edges of the wrought iron railing. The ground stretched before him, expansive, meticulously kept, the kind of place meant to keep people out, yet it had failed to keep out his past. Shirley still didn't know. Every moment he spent near her, the truth clawed at him. He watched her with Roy, saw the way she smiled at the boy, saw the way she looked at him with cautious gratitude, and it killed him. Nicholas exhaled sharply, dragging a hand over his face. He needed to focus, needed to think. But before he could, the sound of tires crunching over gravel pierced the morning stillness. A car, unfamiliar. Nicholas turned toward the long driveway, his muscles tensing. The vehicle, a sleek, dark sedan, rolled to a stop near the front steps. The moment the door opened, he knew. Willie. The man stepped out, shaking off his coat as if he belonged here. Nicholas's jaw locked. Of all the things he had expected, this wasn't one of them. He was already moving before he registered his own actions, his coffee abandoned on the railing. Inside, Shirley was in the living room, gently rocking Roy in her arms. The morning light caught in her hair, and for a fleeting moment, she looked calm. Then she heard the knock, a sharp, deliberate sound. Not a request, an intrusion. Shirley's entire body went still. Her breath hitched, fingers tightening around Roy. She knew that knock, knew it like a scar, like an old wound that never fully healed. Her blood ran cold. No, he couldn't be here. Her pulse roared in her ears. Her entire body screamed at her to run, but she didn't move, not as Nicholas appeared in the doorway, not as he looked at her, his expression unreadable, but his presence steady. "Stay here," he said, voice lower than usual. Shirley couldn't speak, couldn't even nod. She just held Roy closer as Nicholas stepped away. Nicholas opened the door, and there he was. Willie Caldwell. The man had the air of someone who thought he was untouchable. His hair was neatly combed, his suit pressed, but there was something wrong in his smile. A smugness, a certainty that he would get what he came for. "I was wondering when you'd come looking," Nicholas said, leaning against the doorframe. His voice was cold, measured. Willie's smile didn't waver. "You must be Vaughan. I'd say it's a pleasure, but—" His eyes flickered toward the house. "I think we both know why I'm here." Nicholas didn't blink, didn't move. "I want Shirley and my son." Something in Nicholas's chest twisted. His fingers curled into fists at his sides, but he kept his voice steady. "They're not yours." Willie laughed. "Legally, they are." Nicholas exhaled slowly, forcing himself to remain still. He had seen men like Willie before, men who thought control was their right. "You can leave now," Nicholas said. Willie's expression darkened, but the smile remained. Thin, cruel. "You have no idea what she's told you, do you?" he mused. "Shirley's good at playing the victim." Nicholas's patience thinned. His fingers itched to break something. But then, a sound from behind him. A sharp inhale. A muffled gasp. Nicholas didn't have to turn to know Shirley was standing just beyond the doorway. Willie's eyes landed on her instantly, and the moment they did, Shirley shrank back. Nicholas saw it, the way her shoulders curled inward, the way her grip on Roy tightened, the way her breath came unevenly. And that was it. The moment Nicholas knew. He stepped forward, blocking Willie's view of her. His stance was deliberate, his presence unmovable. "They're not going anywhere," Nicholas said, his voice like steel. Willie's smile faded, his jaw clenched. "This isn't over," he muttered, his hand twitching at his side. "She's my wife." "No," Nicholas said, voice even. "She isn't." Willie's nostrils flared. For a long moment they stared at each other. Then, without another word, Willie turned and walked away. Nicholas didn't move, not until the car disappeared down the long driveway, swallowed by the trees. Only then did he step back inside. Shirley was still standing in the hallway, frozen in place. Roy whimpered in her arms, but she didn't seem to notice. Nicholas shut the door behind him, locking it. Then he turned to her. "He's not coming back," he said. Shirley finally looked at him. Her eyes were glassy, wide with something raw, something like disbelief. For a moment she didn't speak. Then, in a barely there whisper, "You don't know him." Nicholas's throat tightened. Maybe he didn't. But he knew men like Willie, and if Willie thought this was over, he was wrong. The house was silent, but the tension in the air felt like the aftershock of a storm that hadn't fully passed. Shirley sat on the couch, Roy curled in her arms, his tiny breath steady against her chest. She wasn't shaking anymore, but she wasn't calm either. She could still feel the weight of Willie's presence lingering in the space he had occupied, a ghost of control and fear. Nicholas stood a few feet away, hands shoved into his pockets, his expression unreadable. He had stepped in, blocked Willie, protected her. No one had ever done that before. The thought unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She exhaled slowly, pressing a soft kiss to Roy's forehead. He was too young to understand, too small to know how close things had come to unraveling again. She glanced at Nicholas. He hadn't moved. The way he stood there, so still, so composed, it was almost easy to believe that what had happened hadn't affected him. Almost. But Shirley had spent years reading the smallest shifts in people. She had learned how to gauge their moods, how to anticipate anger, how to disappear before things turned dangerous. And right now, despite the stillness, despite the silence, Nicholas Vaughan was anything but unaffected. His jaw was tight, his shoulders locked. And then she saw it, the weight in his eyes, a heaviness that hadn't been there before, a heaviness that looked too much like guilt. Shirley's stomach twisted. She had felt safe for the briefest moment, had let herself believe that Nicholas was different. But something about him now, the way he refused to meet her eyes, the way he carried himself, made her feel like she was about to be proven wrong. She sat up a little straighter. "Nicholas." He finally looked at her. And in that instant, she knew. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. Her grip on Roy tightened instinctively. "What is it?" Nicholas hesitated. For a man who never second-guessed himself, the pause was damning. He exhaled slowly, dragging a hand down his face like he was trying to steady himself. Then, finally, he spoke. "Shirley." He hesitated, voice lower than usual, rougher. "There's something I need to tell you." Shirley didn't move, didn't blink. "I should have told you sooner," he continued, his voice unreadable. "But I didn't know until recently, and when I did, He stopped, exhaled, and looked away. That was the worst part. Nicholas Vaughan never looked away, unless it was bad, really, really bad. Shirley felt her heartbeat stutter. "Tell me," she said. He inhaled, as if steadying himself for impact. Then, For the first time in years, he told the truth. 15 years ago, I was working for someone I shouldn't have been working for. Shirley's expression didn't change, but her lips pressed together just slightly. Nicholas kept going. I wasn't like I am now. I didn't have wealth, power, or anything that gave me control over my own life. I was young, reckless, and I made a lot of bad choices. One of them led me to a job collecting debts. That's how I ended up on that street that night. Her brow furrowed slightly, but she didn't interrupt. I was sent to collect from a man who owed money. It wasn't supposed to be complicated. Get in, get out. But he didn't have what he owed, and things got out of hand. We fought, right there in the middle of the street. Shirley's breathing changed, just barely, but Nicholas noticed. There was a car coming. His voice tightened. I didn't see it at first. I was too caught up in what I was doing. But the driver saw me, saw us. They swerved. Shirley didn't blink, didn't move, didn't breathe. The car lost control, Nicholas continued. It crashed. Finally, Shirley spoke. What does this have to do with me? Nicholas felt his throat close, but he forced himself to answer. Your parents were in that car. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, painfully, Shirley's lips parted. What? Nicholas swallowed. Your parents. It was their car. Shirley shook her head. No. It was raining, he continued, his voice steady, even though everything inside him was unraveling. It was late. You were in the back seat. She didn't shake her head this time. She didn't move at all. I called an ambulance. His hands curled into fists, pressing into his thighs. But I left. I didn't stay. I didn't check if... His voice faltered. Shirley's fingers tightened around Roy's blanket, her knuckles going white. You knew, she whispered, her voice hoarse, empty. You knew when you found out who I was. Yes. Her chest rose and fell too quickly, panic creeping in. You helped me. She blinked, as if trying to clear the haze from her vision. Out of guilt. No, Nicholas said immediately, his voice sharp. I didn't know when I took you in. I swear to you I didn't know. Shirley stared at him, her face unreadable. But when you did... Nicholas's throat felt raw. I didn't know how to tell you. Shirley let out a soft, humorless laugh. It wasn't real laughter. It was the sound of something breaking. You didn't know how to tell me, she repeated. Nicholas exhaled sharply. I should have told you. I know that. Shirley stood abruptly. Roy stirred in her arms, shifting at the sudden movement, but she barely seemed to notice. I have to go, she murmured. Nicholas's stomach twisted. Shirley! She took a step back. I can't be here. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't anything. It was just hollow. Nicholas rose to his feet. Please don't leave like this. Shirley looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time since she had arrived, she looked at him like he was the enemy. I trusted you. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were sharp. I shouldn't have. Nicholas felt the words cut through him like a blade, but he didn't stop her, because he knew he had no right to. She turned toward the door, shifting Roy in her arms, and without another word, she left. The house had never felt this empty before. Nicholas had lived alone for years, had built his life around solitude, around silence. But this was different. This wasn't the kind of silence that came with peace or quiet. This was the kind of silence that felt like a punishment. Shirley was gone. Roy was gone. And Nicholas had no one to blame but himself. The first day, he tried to act like nothing had changed. He went to his office, opened his laptop, checked his emails. He told himself that work would be a distraction, that numbers and deals and negotiations would drown out the weight in his chest. But when he sat down at his desk, he found himself staring at the chair across from him, the one Shirley had sat in, curled up with Roy in her arms, exhausted but safe. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, unmoving. He shut the laptop. The second day, he didn't even pretend. He walked through the house like a ghost, his mind replaying everything in sharp, unforgiving detail. The way her eyes had gone hollow when she realized the truth. The way her hands had trembled as she clutched Roy to her chest. The way she had walked past him without looking back. Nicholas had never wanted to take something back more than he did now. But there was nothing he could do. Nothing. By the third day, he stopped fighting it. He sat in the living room, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey in front of him, listening to the silence press in from all sides. He had spent years building a life where he didn't need anyone, where no one could get close enough to matter. And yet, somehow, in just a few weeks, Shirley and Roy had become something he wasn't ready to lose. But he had lost them anyway. Because of a choice he had made 15 years ago. Because of the man he had been. Because of the cowardice that had kept him from telling her the truth sooner. Nicholas exhaled shakily, dragging a hand through his hair. That night, Roy cried. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. It wasn't soft, it wasn't restless, it was loud, desperate. A sound of confusion, of fear, of loss. Nicholas froze outside Shirley's bedroom door. He had been walking past when he heard it, and now he stood there, his body tense, his breath held, staring at the closed door like it was a threshold he couldn't cross. She's not here anymore. He knew it. And yet, for one impossible second, he wanted to walk inside. He wanted to pick Roy up, to tell him that it was okay, that everything was fine. But it wasn't. It wasn't fine. Nicholas's fingers hovered over the doorknob. For the first time in his life, he felt unworthy of stepping into his own house. His hand clenched into a fist. And then, slowly, he turned away. Roy kept crying, and Nicholas kept walking. The next morning, Nicholas drowned himself in work. It was the only thing he could do. He sat in his office, staring at reports, answering calls, speaking in the same controlled, detached voice he always used. He signed deals, negotiated figures, read through contracts. Nothing changed, except that it did. Because every time he looked up, he expected to see her. He expected to see Shirley walking past the doorway, hair tucked behind her ear, clutching Roy close to her chest, still hesitant, still unsure if she belonged here. He expected to hear her voice, quiet but firm, asking him why he was always working. But she wasn't there, and she wasn't coming back. Nicholas set his pen down. His hands were steady, his breathing was even. But inside, something was breaking. Shirley walked through the quiet streets, her coat pulled tightly around her, shielding herself from the sharp evening wind. The city lights flickered above, casting elongated shadows along the pavement, but she hardly noticed. She had nowhere to go. She had known this the moment she stepped out of Nicholas's house, Roy cradled in her arms, her chest hollow and aching. She had told herself she would figure something out. She always had. But this time felt different. This time, she wasn't just running from a place. She was running from him. And yet, even now, she couldn't erase him from her mind. The way he had stood there, his expression torn between guilt and something deeper. The way his voice had wavered when he told her the truth. The way, even as she left, he hadn't stopped her, because he knew he had no right to. Shirley exhaled, tightening her grip on Roy. He whimpered softly, shifting against her, and she instinctively kissed the top of his head. She had no one now. And yet, the thought of going back to Nicholas, of looking at him and knowing what he had done, felt unbearable. She wouldn't let herself break over this. She couldn't. Nicholas knew she had gone. It took him days to admit it to himself. At first, he had convinced himself that she would leave the city entirely, disappear the way people did when they wanted to start over. He had spent sleepless nights staring at his phone, debating calling her, knowing she wouldn't answer. But deep down, he knew Shirley. She had nowhere else to go. And if there was one thing he knew about her, it was that she would never let Roy suffer because of her own pain. That was why, on the 5th night, he found himself standing outside the shelter. It was a modest building tucked into a quiet neighborhood, its entrance illuminated by a dim overhead light. The kind of place that helped people get back on their feet, the kind of place Shirley had been forced to rely on before. Nicholas hadn't stepped inside yet. His fingers flexed at his sides, his breath visible in the cold air. He had no right to be here. He had no right to ask anything of her, but he hadn't come for himself. He had come because he couldn't make the same mistake twice. With a slow inhale, he stepped through the doors. The space was small but clean, rows of cots lined neatly along the walls. A few scattered figures sat at tables in the common area, quiet conversations murmuring through the air. Then he saw her. Shirley was sitting in the corner, rocking Roy gently, her fingers brushing over his tiny hand as he slept. Her hair fell over her face, shielding her expression, but Nicholas didn't need to see it to know she was exhausted. He swallowed hard, taking a step closer. She must have sensed him, because she stiffened before she even looked up. When her eyes met his, something unreadable flickered across her face. Surprise, hurt, anger. But she didn't speak. Nicholas stood there, unsure for the first time in years. Then, slowly, he lowered himself into the chair across from her. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then, Nicholas exhaled. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness." Shirley's fingers tensed around Roy's blanket. "I know I don't deserve anything from you," he continued quietly, his voice steady but raw. "I know that what I did can't be undone." She looked away. "Then why are you here?" Nicholas's throat tightened. "Because I can't stand knowing that I let you walk away." But he didn't say that. Instead, he leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Because I don't want to make the same mistake again." Shirley inhaled sharply. "I don't want to be the man who walks away from this," Nicholas said, his voice softer now. "I don't want to be the reason you have to fight alone. Not anymore." Shirley let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. "You don't get to decide that, Nicholas." "I know." Her lips pressed together, her gaze flickering toward Roy, as if grounding herself. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." Nicholas nodded slowly. He had expected that. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," she whispered. His chest ached, but he didn't flinch. "I understand." Shirley's fingers trembled against the fabric of Roy's blanket, but for the first time, she didn't tell him to leave. For the first time, she didn't turn away. Nicholas had spent his entire life believing that if something was broken, it could be replaced. Deals could be renegotiated. Empires could be rebuilt. Even mistakes, when handled properly, could be buried under enough wealth and time to disappear entirely. But this mistake couldn't be fixed. Shirley was gone one more time. And Nicholas was beginning to understand that there were some things you couldn't undo, no matter how much you wanted to. Days passed. Nicholas didn't count them, but he felt them. The silence in his house had become unbearable. At first, he had convinced himself that he could move past it, pour himself into work, shut out the guilt, bury it under the routine of power and control. But it didn't work. Nothing worked, because Shirley was everywhere. She was in the empty coffee cup left untouched on the counter, in the faint scent of lavender that still clung to the guest room sheets, in the way he caught himself listening for sounds that would never come. Roy's quiet whimpers, Shirley's hesitant footsteps, the warmth of a life that had once existed inside these walls. And then, on the 6th day, he received the letter. It was small, folded neatly, with only an address written in simple, careful handwriting. No name, no explanation, but he knew it was from her. Nicholas stared at it for a long time, long enough for his pulse to slow and his mind to sharpen. She hadn't told him to come, but she hadn't told him to stay away either. And that meant something. The neighborhood was quiet, tucked into the poorer side of the city, where the streets were worn and the buildings held stories in their crumbling walls. The address led him to a small shop, a tailor's storefront, modest but clean, with a simple sign above the door. Nicholas stood outside, his fingers flexing at his sides. Then he saw her. Shirley was standing just beyond the threshold, Roy resting against her hip, his small hands gripping the fabric of her coat. She was different here. There was something in the way she stood, not fragile, not broken, but grounded. She was still tired, still cautious, but there was a steadiness in her posture that hadn't been there before. She was surviving. Without him. Nicholas exhaled slowly, stepping forward. Shirley tensed slightly, but she didn't move away. Neither of them spoke at first. Then quietly, she said, "I thought you might come." Nicholas searched her expression. "You wanted me to?" Shirley hesitated. Then, after a long moment, she nodded. Nicholas swallowed. For the first time in weeks, something inside him loosened. She shifted Roy in her arms, adjusting his weight. The baby blinked up at him, his small face unreadable. Nicholas looked at her, taking in the sight of her standing there, not running, not leaving, not slamming the door in his face. "I'm not ready to forgive you," she admitted, her voice careful, quiet. Nicholas's chest ached, but he nodded. "I know." A pause. Then, softer. "But I'm not ready to say goodbye either." Nicholas exhaled. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was something. Hope and future. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. And if you enjoyed this story, please share it with your friends on WhatsApp. And now, share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.